He never fired a musket. He never wore a uniform. He never signed his name to any document that history would bother to keep. But in the winter of 1777, a man named Haym, a Polish-born immigrant who spoke with a heavy accent and carried dishes for British officers, was quietly memorizing every word spoken at their dinner table. And those words, they could have ended America before it truly began. Picture this: Philadelphia, October 1777. The British have just seized the city. General William Howe and his officers are settling in. Warm fires, fine wine, roasted meat. They are comfortable, they are confident, and they are talking. At the edge of the room, nearly invisible, stands a servant. Dark coat, downcast eyes, moving silently between the officers, refilling glasses, clearing plates. They don't notice him. They never do. That was exactly the point. His name was Haym Salomon, a Jewish immigrant from Poland who had already survived more than most men twice his age. He'd fled persecution in Europe, crossed an ocean with almost nothing, and built a modest life as a financial broker in New York. When the revolution broke out, he didn't hesitate. He believed in what America was trying to become, a place where a man wasn't defined by his birth, his accent, or his faith. The British arrested him in 1776 on suspicion of espionage. They threw him in the Provost prison, a place men entered and rarely left standing. But Haym Salomon had a gift the British couldn't resist. He spoke 8 languages fluently. So instead of executing him, they put him to work as an interpreter and liaison for their Hessian mercenary troops. They needed him, and in needing him, they handed him the most dangerous weapon in any war: access. He was released, monitored, but free enough to move, free enough to listen. And listen he did. At British officer dinners, at Hessian command briefings, in the corridors of occupied Philadelphia, Haym Salomon was always nearby, always just a servant, always just an interpreter. The British officers laughed loudly, argued openly, and planned carelessly, because who would a foreign-born Jew tell? Who would believe him? Beat. What they didn't know was that Haym was feeding every scrap of intelligence directly to the Culper spy ring, George Washington's secret network of agents operating behind enemy lines. Troop movements, supply routes, officer disagreements that revealed fractures in British command, the names of loyalist informants embedded in patriot communities. He passed it all, in coded messages, through trusted hands, at enormous personal risk. If caught a second time, there would be no interpreter's reprieve. There would only be a rope. But the espionage was only half the story, because by 1779, the Continental Army wasn't just losing battles, it was dissolving. Soldiers hadn't been paid in months. Washington's officers were threatening to resign. The French alliance, America's lifeline, was straining under the weight of unpaid debts. Congress was broke. The revolution was running out of time. And then, Haym Salomon did something that no spy manual could have prepared anyone for. He started writing personal checks. Out of his own pocket, his brokerage earnings, his savings, everything he had built, Haym Salomon began financing the American Revolution. He personally loaned money to James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and Edmund Randolph when they couldn't afford to stay in Philadelphia to govern. He brokered French and Dutch loans that kept Washington's army clothed and fed through the brutal winter campaigns. Historians estimate he contributed the equivalent of millions of dollars in today's money. He never asked for it back. He died in 1885, just 2 years after the war ended. He was 44 years old, broke. The loans he'd made to the new nation were never repaid. His family was left with almost nothing. Congress acknowledged the debt, then did nothing about it. For nearly 2 centuries, his name barely appeared in a textbook. The man who helped fund the revolution, the man who fed intelligence to Washington's network, the man who was dismissed as just a servant, just an immigrant, just an interpreter, had quietly held the entire enterprise together from the shadows. Here is what history rarely asks. What does it take to risk everything for a country that hasn't fully decided if it wants you yet? Haym Salomon knew the answer. He gave it anyway. History remembers the generals on horseback. It forgets the man refilling their enemy's glass and remembering every word.